There is a rising problem with open world games. The scope and magnitude of open world games is getting bigger and bigger. Soon enough, indie studios will struggle to create massive open world games that can compete with AAA studios. In that, the creativity and innovation that indie devs bring will be lost to the AAA juggernauts who rinse and repeat the same titles but in new locations. And as the games expand in size, so will that void that exists in open world games now. I love open world games. From the Elder Scrolls, Red Dead Redemption, Kingdom Come, Breath of the Wild, the freedom they provide to the player to choose their own adventure is why I love games. But I fear for the future of open world games. Indie developers have become the saviors of gaming over the past decade, bringing some of the most creative and unique stories to the market. From Undertale, Stardew Valley, and Firewatch. If you didn't notice, none of those games, or really any of the most popular indie titles in the past few years, are open world games. And that's because they take a ton of time and an enormous amount of money to make. Most open world games are released by AAA studios because they have the resources to do so. But most of these AAA studios lack creativity that flows from indie game developers because they are pigeonholed by parent companies and board of directors who just want to see maximum financial gain. My fear is that great open world games are going to slowly start dying because AAA studios won't take risk and indie studios can't afford to make such enormous games. As expectations from the players continually rise on what constitutes a good game, the budgets will rise as well. As the scope of the game expands, so does production time and cost. No better example of this would be Bethesda. There were 4 years between Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind and Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, then around 5 years between Oblivion and Skyrim. 12 years later, still no Elder Scrolls 6, and production of it won't even start until their new game Starfield is launched, so at best Elder Scrolls 6 will be showing up sometime after 2028. The more time that passes, the higher expectations will continue to rise for Elder Scrolls 6. Bethesda went from releasing an incredible open world RPG every few years, alternating between the Fallout series and the Elder Scrolls series. Now they're trying to create games that will last 10 plus years that they can just release DLC for and endless new additions. And I'm sure if the Elder Scrolls wasn't already hard-baked as a series, after Skyrim's meteoric success, Bethesda would have much rather just made Skyrim 2 Return of the Dragonborn instead of having to make an entirely new game. This is what big studios do now. They find what works and copy and paste the exact same game but into a new setting. Look at games like Assassin's Creed and Far Cry, two beautiful game series that were some of the most fun games I'd ever played when I was a teenager, and they found what worked and stopped innovating. Each game is fairly different than the other because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, those games have become unplayable for me. Here's an intro sequence of a bad guy. Climb a tower, see a big pretty map, clear an outpost, follow this guy. The gameplay and mechanics of games like Assassin's Creed and Far Cry are super fun and arcade-like, which I get is probably the main selling point of the game, but the worlds feel fake to me. Collectible items are spread across the map to make you go explore, not because the world is calling to you, but because you need to go out and collect crap. Even the sacred Breath of the Wild kind of fell victim to this. Korok seeds are scattered across the map as these little things to fetch and force players to explore that most of the time didn't really result in anything that interesting. DJ Peach Cobbler actually has a really great video talking all about that. Some indie teams have tried to take on the monumental task of creating a huge open world. No Man's Sky is the perfect example of a smaller team that may have been over-ambitious on the scope of a game and the resources available to them. The developers over at Hello Games dreamt of this monumental, groundbreaking game that just didn't quite meet expectations at release. They promised so much out of a tiny studio that even a AAA company would have had trouble creating this game. And the game got absolutely crushed on release because so many of the features the developers promised were just non-existent. They have since then, however, gone back and really rectified a lot of these mistakes and have created a very great game that a lot of people seem to enjoy. I don't know what really defines a AAA studio, but in my mind it's companies like Rockstar, Activision, EA, and Ubisoft. Companies like Bethesda, From Software, and CD Projekt Red have now started to enter that echelon with the enormous mainstream success of Skyrim, Elden Ring, the Witcher series, and Cyberpunk. But there is a space that exists between the indie studios and the AAA where hope still exists for great open world games. Mid-sized studios like Warhorse Studios and Obsidian, two of my favorites, companies that definitely don't classify as indie but probably aren't AAA studios either. Kingdom Come Deliverance by Warhorse is probably one of the most enjoyable RPGs I've played since the release of Skyrim. Then Obsidian produced one of the greatest open world RPGs of all time with Fallout New Vegas. And both are smaller games in scale than when compared to Skyrim or Cyberpunk, but they have so much more depth that it's unbelievable. People often associate map size with game quality. They think that a big map must mean there's more to do and therefore worth my $60. Far Cry 6's map is 88 square kilometers. That's insane. Who is that big of a map for? It's funny that this has become a selling point for a lot of games now. When I see a number like that, I instantly think, well, there's no way anything interesting is happening on that map. How could it possibly be? It would take developers forever to fill a map that huge with interesting content. So instead, in the Far Cry series, these giant vast areas are just filled with copy and pasted outposts and events that are the same no matter how deep I travel on the map. While on the other hand, playing Kingdom Come Deliverance, the thought that the map was too small never even crossed my mind, and it's 5 times smaller than Far Cry 6's map. And do you know why it doesn't feel small? Because every foot of it is packed with interesting details and new things to discover. No copy and pasted outposts, no towers to climb, just real interesting details that drive exploration. Map creep, however, is becoming a real problem. Like it or not, people do associate size with quality. If Bethesda comes out and says Elder Scrolls 6 is going to be half the size of Skyrim, people will lose their minds and think that it's a ripoff or Bethesda is just lazy. Even though from a lore perspective, it totally makes sense. The new game is most likely to be set in High Rock, which is around half the size of Skyrim, but with a much greater population density. But people will feel cheated if this game that we've waited 17 years for is half the size. So, AAA games everywhere are going to have to keep expanding in size, which will just result in hollow, empty worlds. Red Dead Redemption 2 is an interesting game for this topic. Easily one of the greatest open world games of all time, produced by a AAA studio, and the map is enormous. It does something extremely interesting though. The majority of the map is actually filled to the brim with things to do, from Easter eggs, quests, random encounters, and enemies to tussle with. But some sections of the map feel totally desolate and nearly devoid of life and interest. And it's in these areas that the game feels the most real. And it's because it's done intentionally to reflect the environment, not just empty because they ran out of ideas. When playing as Arthur, there is always something to be done 24/7, which makes the game fun, but isn't all that real. Not that it matters, I don't think anyone's playing Rockstar games for the realism. But when you enter these desolate areas of the map, it just feels different. This is probably the true feeling of living in the West. Long, lonely horse rides across giant plains, trapped alone with just your thoughts. Jacob Geller has an amazing video called Artificial Loneliness all about these areas, and it's legitimately one of the best YouTube videos I have ever seen. This is an interesting way to create an enormous map though. A massive area with literally thousands of activities to participate in, and then some areas of just immense desolation. And it's that contrasting feeling that evokes emotions and makes the game feel real. My hope is that studios like Bethesda and From Software don't follow suit of companies like Ubisoft or EA, and that they continue to innovate and create unbelievable worlds full of excitement and wonder for the player to discover. Hopefully, too, new indie companies will grow and hold to their standards and bring us more great and unique games. And if you guys have any games or game studio recommendations that I or others should check out, I would love to read those in the comments down below. So, what does all this mean? Well, it seems like the time between actually good AAA open world RPGs is only going to keep increasing as the scope and world size keeps expanding. So, in the meantime, we probably need to try our best to support those mid-sized companies that are trying to produce quality open world games. I love the saying, as wide as the ocean, as deep as a puddle. It's a great way to describe the majority of open world RPGs nowadays, but I'm looking for some nice, juicy lakes. They're pretty big, got some good depth to them, and a lot of interesting stuff swimming around down there, but it's not so big and deep that it's totally devoid of life once you get too far. Just a nice lake. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, like, subscribe, and share the video with your friends. It helps a small channel out like mine a frackin' ton. See you guys.